Welcome, my dear friends and dear guests from across India and many continents afar. Thank you for being part of this historic candid conversation with an enigmatic man oozing of charm and aesthetics, and a mind not conditioned with the patterns of his outward success, academically and otherwise. A man who listens to his instincts deeply, seriously, and is not caught up in time. A man with multidimensional persona. Dr. Kunal Basu is an independent academic and author. Until recently, he was a professor of marketing at Said Business School, University of Oxford, and a research fellow at the university's Green Templeton College. Prior to Oxford, he was associate professor of marketing at McGill University, Canada. Dr. Basu has been a recipient of several distinguished teaching awards, including the prestigious Royal Bank of Canada Teaching Innovation Award. Dr. Basu has played a significant role in institution building, especially with regard to developing a strong international profile. He was the founding director of University of Oxford Centre for Corporate Reputation and McGill University Centre for International Management Studies. Dr. Basu consults frequently with major corporations and government departments. His clients include HSBC, BMW, Lufthansa, Barclays Bank, Standard Bank of South Africa, Royal Bank of Canada, IKEA, PepsiCo, Xerox, PDS, and British Aerospace, and many more. Kunal Basu is also an Indian author of English fiction who has written 6 novels: The Opium Clerk in 2001, The Miniaturist in 2003, Racist in 2006, The Yellow Emperor's Cure in 2011, Calcutta in 2015, Sorojini's Mother in 2020, and The Endgame as a translation from Bengali just prior to the pandemic. The title story of his only collection of short stories, The Japanese Wife, published in 2008, was made into a film by Indian filmmaker Aparna Sen. We shall discuss this foray in greater detail later. Kunalda has also written 4 Bengali novels: Robi Shankar in 2016, Ayre Toja in 2017, Tejeshwani Shabnam in 2018, and Angel 2020, almost every year since the return to the country. Kunalda, welcome to this undiluted, unblemished, uninhibited, unpretentious, unobtrusive, unadulterated chat show. This conversation is going to be exclusive and historic in many ways, as we are going to jointly unravel many deep secrets hidden behind enigmatic you, and we shall jointly endeavor to get to know a bit more of you beyond your novels, for which you have given over 100 interviews the last 2 decades. It is therefore important that we perhaps break some rules to reach our ultimate destination of seeing you in bare completeness your admirers so richly deserve and deeply desire. If you have noticed, Kunalda, my little introduction was in a different order. To us this evening, you are a professional who also writes, both for creation and pleasure. And this is going to be the theme for this evening. We shall tonight get to know many precious incidents and anecdotes all those years prior to 2001, when you published your first novel in English. So, like the real background story behind each of your novels, during the first 60 minutes, we shall be hovering around the previous century and before we enter 2000 and the beginning of your literary creations. We shall then spend half an hour or more on your novels. Perhaps we can choose 3 novels of your choice before we open the house to questions. I propose to wind up the evening by 9 p.m. Indian Standard Time latest. Kunalda, you were born in Kolkata on the 4th of May, 1956, to Sunil Kumar Basu, a literature and publisher, and Chobi Basu, an author and an actress. Born to parents with strong left ideology, you were brought up on books and enriching conversations in a home that was often visited by a galaxy of prominent men and women in those days. Kunalda, can we briefly start with the very beginning, especially with your intriguing place of birth and circumstance? We can then meander through your early life in Kolkata, your growing up years, your influences, your formation of teenage identity, your first love. How much did Kolkata shape your sensibilities? Over to you, Kunalda.
Thank you, Sayan. Thank you all for coming. I'm already feeling nervous. You've given such a generous introduction, far too generous, I should say. My birth was unusual, to say the least. You see, my mum was finishing a manuscript for her publisher. There was a strict deadline. And she thought she would write through the night, and early in the morning, she would finish her manuscript and then go over to the hospital to deliver me. Writers can be very obsessive, you see. But I wasn't willing to wait that long. And so very early in the morning, almost at the crack of dawn, she realized that it was already too late. It was too late to go to the hospital. And therefore, very hurriedly, a theater of birth, so to speak, was created on the floor of my parents' study, surrounded by books. And there I was delivered by my aunt. And it was a dangerous event because, births at home without proper medical attention could lead to fatalities for both my mom and for myself. Luckily, we survived. Both of us survived. Okay. So in the excitement of the morning, when my father was running around trying to find a doctor, he forgot to register the birth of his son, which is why, to this date, I don't have a birth certificate.
Unborn child. That's
Right.
interesting.
Right.
No wonder you're still so young at heart, Kunal. So this is the little secret. That's amazing. And this happened in the year 1956, right?
Indeed. The 2500th birth anniversary of Lord Buddha, which is why I was named Kunal, which is a name which is derived from Buddhist texts and from that period of time.
Kunalda, your parents, they had strong influences on you, right, from a very, very early age.
Yeah, they were exceptional people. They were exceptional for their times. I think they're exceptional even in today's times. Because my mother, as you said, was a writer. She acted with Ritik Kotuk in theater. My father was an independent publisher. And our house was always full of books and always full of arguments. Arguments about debates, about books, about film, about theater, and about politics. And there were exceptional people who visited, such as Satyajit Ray, Mrinal Sen, Subhash Mukhopadhyay, the poet, and many, many others. You see, the impact of all of that on my growing up was profound. Because I was a very sickly child. I had two very major illnesses when I was quite young. And I couldn't attend school. I would lie in bed for long hours, and I would eavesdrop on the conversations of my parents and their friends. And as a precocious child, I tried to imagine myself in their world, the world of my parents and their friends. Okay, and a lot of my early induction into the arts really happened through overhearing conversation. Okay, and it was a very enriching conversation. To give you an example, so there was Barin Shaha, the famous Bengali filmmaker, recently returned from Italy. And there was this major debate in our household about the merits of the French Nouvelle Vague movement, a movement in cinema, and Italian neorealism. Okay. Now, I didn't understand any of that at that age, but I realized that all of that was very important. It was very important for the human condition. It was very important for the human soul to immerse oneself in the arts. And therefore, it did have, my upbringing did have a profound influence of me in terms of what I think, how I think, and what I value as precious in my life.
So, Kunal, at that stage, that's post World War II, the West was collapsing, and there was shift in ideology. So,
Yeah.
communism picked up in a big way, not just in this part of the world, but even across. So, did that have a bit of influence in you in your earlier years?
Yeah, definitely so. You see, as you correctly pointed out, Marxism was more than a partisan political thing as it is made out today. Okay, there was a distinction, and it's important to realize that distinction. A lot of creative people, artistic people, intellectuals all over the world, from Bertrand Russell to Pablo Picasso, were searching for an alternative in a world that was ravaged by wars. Okay. And the Soviet example had appeared at that time to be a viable humanistic approach. Now, obviously, many of them were proven to be mistaken and wrong and disillusioned in the years that followed. At that juncture of time, socialism, the dream of Marxism, the dream of communism meant being enlightened, being free of the binds of feudal societies, being free of the binds of the rich and the poor, the ability to dream and create a new world.
How was that?
Now, look, like all grand dreams, this dream too had failed. And we know that over a number of years. But that element of caring for the other, being empathetic towards the other, to feel deeply for people who are dispossessed has not left me. I'm not an ideological person. I'm not at this point stage in my life, and for quite a number of years, have not ascribed to any specific political ideology. Okay. But the caring, the empathy, the sympathy for the dispossessed, for people who are much poorer, much worse off than I am, okay, has remained in me. I think it has influenced the way I write.
And I think we will talk about this later too, because this theme of compassion, which runs right through all your novels, perhaps the seed of all of this started way back when you were a 10-year-old and when you were completely immersed with all that was happening around your family home. And could you tell us a bit about your schooling and the other things which happened during that period? So this was all in the early 70s, right?
Yeah, it was late 60s in school and then early 70s in university. I was a shy boy in school, okay, if you can believe that. Um, I was quite shy. I went to South Point School. As a South Calcutta boy, I went to South Point School. And in those days, if you closed your eyes and you threw a stone, it would hit a South Point. Okay? Because it was a big school with many, many, many students. And there was a possibility of really getting lost in such a big school. Okay. And I think the thing that is most remarkable, at least remarkable to me, about my schooling was that I made a very deep error when I was in school. A deep error that left a fairly lasting mark on my life and my career. You see, unfortunately, I was a very good student. And I say it's unfortunate because I used to score high marks in subjects that I didn't care about.
Yeah.
I really didn't care about mathematics, but I used to top my class. Okay. And it's unfortunate because at that young age, your marks prompt you and sort of tended to push you in a certain direction, which is not your natural direction.
Unfortunately, that hasn't changed over the years. Even now, it's so sad that we don't listen to our instincts and what we really need to do. So, sorry, continue.
Shine, today's kids have access to much more information than we did. Okay, there's the internet, there are friends, there are mentors, there are guides, and the whole world is their oyster. When we were kids, if you came from a middle class family like I did, if you did not become a doctor or an engineer, then you became unemployed. And being unemployed was not a choice I could afford. So I studied science, although I should have studied humanities. And when I unfortunately again got a rank in my higher secondary examination, everybody around me said, "Oh, you should study engineering."
So I need to ask you this. Did history interest you at that stage in school?
Oh, absolutely. I'm the historian inside me is still weeping after all these years. History was my favorite subject.
Mhm.
And I used to read voraciously books of history in my parents' collection. My mother was a historian. History was alive in our household. And I really should have studied history. But as I said, I ended up studying mechanical engineering, not having a clue what that meant.
So we're going to get into that bit of stage of your life, but I think you can thank mathematics and for all that it meant over the years that helped you to have this kind of a clinical iterative mind. I think even that helped you to vocationally for all the choices you've made for going overseas. So we'll come to that a bit later. So now first tell us, so you finished your schooling and then you did your mechanical engineering from Jadavpur. And what were the years you completed that? That was
Engineering degrees in those days were 5 years, if you can, if you recall. So 73 to 78.
8.
I have to say that I did everything besides mechanical engineering in those 5 years. Okay, I acted in theater, published little magazines, was actively engaged in politics. Remember, those were the years of the emergency. Okay, and
You even made a movie, I think. Was that a bit later?
that was later. That was later.
Okay.
And then again, when I was finishing up my bachelor's degree in engineering, I had no clue what would be the next step. I hadn't given any thought to career, which sounds very strange, but I really hadn't. Okay. And one day, I remember my older sister, my only sibling, who was a student in IIT Kharagpur, came home for holidays. And she said, "Well, what are you doing? I mean, your contemporaries in IIT are taking GRE exams." I said, "What's GRE?" She said, "Well, that's an exam you take. And if you do really well, then you get a scholarship to go to America and study and do a master's." And I thought to myself, now, wait a second. If I take an exam and if I do well, then somebody's going to pay me to travel around the world.
That appealed to you tremendously, I
Oh,
suppose.
that's great.
Yeah.
I mean, how else would I end up traveling around the world, which is obviously a dream that many young people had, and I did too. So I took a GRE, and again, I did well, got a scholarship to go to America. And I said, look, all the cost that I would have to bear is to do a master's, right? A master's in engineering. that didn't matter. I could probably do a master's in engineering. Okay. The funny thing is, Sayan, these days, I don't know much. I don't do any math.
Mhm.
In those days, I could do math with my eyes closed. Okay. And so I ended up going to the US to do a master's in engineering, finished it, and then came back to India in 1980. Again, not really knowing where I was headed.
Yeah.
I think you're getting the drift of my early years, Sayan.
Yeah.
And the drift of my early years was I did lots of things out of passion, okay, which was theater, which was writing, which was politics. That was my passion. But I didn't spend much time thinking about my profession. Okay.
Yeah.
And I sort of stumbled from one thing to the other.
The balance between profession and passion was
Yeah.
played hugely upon you at that stage.
And in those days, it was hard.
Yeah.
You see, I became, when I came back from the US after my master's, I started acting with Utpal Dotto in People's Little Theatre in PLT. But I realized soon enough that I didn't love theatre that much to devote my entire life to it. Okay, I did book reviews for the Statesman, but in those days you got paid 40 rupees for a book review. There was not enough to.
So you could get a feeling that you're an individualistic kind of a person. You would like to do things your way. I mean, a filmmaking means you're doing things, collectively, and perhaps that was slowing down your process. I mean, this is just something which over the years you have done things, listening to yourself deeply, astutely, but doing it with which is best for you. So could be you tried out so many things that this was all between 80 and 82, right? Between those 2 years.
It is. It was. It was. Yeah. And what's important is that trial and error has been a running theme in my life. There's some people who think very carefully, and I admire them. I admire them, who think very carefully and they say, well, this is what I ought to do. Okay. And then having decided that, they pursue that course of action. Okay. Whereas for me, for large parts of my life, especially my early years, I have been a wanderer. I've been an adventurer. I've tried things, okay, not really grasping what would be the consequences of that. And in the trial and error process, there have been many errors. There have been many, many errors. Okay. As you indicated, I co-directed a documentary film on urban violence called Football. In those days, football, there was a lot of crowd violence in the stands, if you can remember, in the early 80s. There was this terrible incident on 16th of August, 1980, during a football match between Mohun Bagan and East Bengal in the Eden Gardens, where a number of spectators died. Mm-hmm. Incidentally, I was in the stands that day. Okay. And so I made a documentary film, co-directed it with another person. And I realized, error once again, I realized that film direction was not my calling. It was not my calling because as much as I was excited by cinema, I was not a team player. I was not a person who could bring lots of people together around a vision and execute that. Okay. I lived inside my head, as I do now. Okay. I lived inside my own passions, my own creative instincts. Okay. And therefore, it was not the right choice for me to become a film director. So there were processes of elimination that gradually started moving me in a direction, which then would become a more lasting theme in my life. That would be the academic life.
So those 2 years, 80 and 82, were watershed in many ways because it helped you understand what you need to be doing. In some ways, because you went into the activity and then realized that there's something beyond it, which was driving you, which was something. But then something very interesting happened in 82, right? Which was also kind of a catharsis, or I won't use the word catharsis, but it was something which stabilized the other kind of stuff which was happening around you. One is, of course, the fact that you decided by end of 82 that you're going to go back to the US to pursue your master's. And the other was meeting Shushmita. So would you like to talk about that? How did that happen, really?
Well, the first one, you see, having completed this film, which by the way was called Football, it has nothing to do really with the game of football, but the hysteria around the game. Okay. But once I finished the film, I felt really quite burnt. I realized that this is not really what I wanted to do. And I gave myself a short holiday. And I went to Nepal. I was an avid trekker in those days, so I traveled around the Himalayas, and I came to Kathmandu. Mm-hmm. In those days, when there was no internet, for all these travelers, call them hippies, call them whatever, backpackers, they would be going around the world, and their families and friends would write to them, care of a post office. So if they knew that somebody from, say, Iowa was traveling, going around the world, and would come to Kathmandu during a certain point in time, they would write a letter, care of the Kathmandu post office. So in front of the post office, you see a whole bunch of young people traveling from all over the world who would collect their letters from home, sit down and read them eagerly. Letters from their dear and loved ones. Okay. And as I sat outside the Kathmandu post office, I asked myself, when and from where will my letter come from? Okay. And again, on an instinct, in a split second, I decided that I needed to go back, return to the US. Okay. And then search again in terms of what is it that I would like to do with my life. And I wrote a letter from Kathmandu, sitting outside that post office, in those international air letters, if you can remember. Shayan, that one had in those days.
Right.
And I wrote to my master's dissertation advisor, who had really pleaded and said, look, you should stay back and do a PhD. And I said, no, I'm not interested in doing a PhD. I want to go back to India. So I wrote a letter to my PhD advisor saying, I'm ready now. I'm ready now to come back to the US and do a PhD. Okay. And by the time I finished my travels in Nepal and came back to Kolkata, the admissions letter was sitting at home.
How providential was
so
that?
that in many ways completed the circle. And those 2 years, 80 to 82, were difficult years for me. Okay. But it taught me lots of things. It took me inside myself and said, free of expectations, what is it that I really want to be?
But you decided you will still do your master's in mechanical, right?
No, my PhD in mechanical. Master's had finished in mechanical.
You finished your master's, sorry, your PhD in mechanical. Okay.
Yeah, that was the only option. Although I was not really in love with mechanical engineering, I saw that as a ticket out. Okay, but then I will explain to you in a moment why and how did I shift from engineering to management. But meeting Shushmita was the highlight of 1982 for me. Okay, I was quite an avid photographer those days. Mm-hmm. It's not just amateur photography, but my work, I've also showed it in exhibitions and things like that. And I remember going out from our home in South Kolkata with my camera to take photographs of old Kolkata, North Kolkata, the part of the city I was born, okay, Shambajar. And just as I was about to leave home, I tried to look through my lenses to see if there was any fungus in the lenses. Because if you know, Kolkata is a very humid place, and humidity leads to fungus on the lenses. So I was checking to see if my lenses were okay. And I saw a young woman pass through my lenses. Now, this was quite strange to me because I thought I knew every young lady in my neighborhood, but I hadn't seen this one. Okay. So I took a few steps. I didn't quite follow her, but I took a few steps and I saw that she went into a lane which was adjacent to ours. And it was a house which was really behind our house. And this was very puzzling because I knew that an elderly widow lived in that house and nobody else did. So after I'd come back from my photographic expedition, I asked my mom. I asked her, well, are there new tenants who've moved in next doors? And she said, why do you ask? Did you see anyone? I said, yeah, actually, I saw a young lady walking into that house and I've never seen her before. She said, oh. A few days later, she produced a black and white photograph and said, is this the person you saw? You see, she had done her detective work. She knew the lady who lived there. She had done her detective work. She said, this is the photograph, is the person that you saw. I said, yeah. And but then my mother said, well, she's a student in Vishwabharati in Shantiniketan, and this is her name. And that was enough for me. So I caught a train. I went to Vishwabharati. I managed to track her down. I met her. And in about 3 months later, we were married.
In December of 82?
In December of 82, in January of 82.
January of 82.
Yeah.
So here you were looking at yourself to get back to the US to complete. So everything happened really quick in that point of time, right? So it was something which you had to decide instinctively, again, as always, listening to yourself deeply. So, and both of you went back together to the US?
That's right. In the interim, something interesting happened. I mean, this probably completes out my early years. Is, as I said, I was not really interested in doing a PhD in mechanical engineering. And I met a Bengali gentleman in a party in Kolkata in early 82.
The Amit Basu experience.
Yeah, that's right. He's a friend of one of my older cousins. Okay. And he was a professor of business in America. And he said, well, he asked me, what are you doing these days? I know that you meant to do your master's, you come back, what are you up to? And I said, I'm not really up to much. I'm doing this and that. I was also at that point a lecturer in mechanical engineering in Jadavpur University. I was in theater, I was doing, writing for the Statesman, but not really anything in particular. And he said, have you considered doing a PhD in business? I said, what's that? I don't have a clue. What's that? he said, rather than me explaining it to you, here are a couple of papers. Why don't you read them and see what you make of it?
Mhm.
So you see, academic scholarly articles in management studies are really social sciences in disguise. Okay. So you've got sociology, anthropology, psychology, cognitive science, and economics, and so on and so forth. And so when I read these two papers, I said, aha, this is my ultimate exit from engineering. Okay. So if I do a PhD in management instead, then it will allow me to move from the regime of numbers to the republic of words.
How well said. Yeah.
And I wanted to make this transition to the republic of words, into reading text, into reading articles and writing essays, rather than spend my entire life looking at a computer screen and doing numerical analysis.
How incredible is that? So that was, and then you did complete your PhD in a record period of 3 years and something, in spite of having Ajlai the next year. So that's another story by itself, right? So she was born when 83?
He was born in 83.
83 end, right?
Yes, yes.
So
yes, Ajlai was born an unplanned child for which we are eternally thankful. And in the first year of my PhD program, which, as people who do their PhDs would tell you, is the wrong time to become a father. Okay, but it didn't bother us. I mean, we were desperately poor, surviving on a scholarship. I would be working all day, studying all day, in taking classes, taking exams, and coming home. And our daughter stayed up all night crying. So I'd be trying to put her to sleep at night and right the next morning go back to the department. But that was a fascinating and exciting period of my life. There was one tragedy, though. There was one tragedy during that the PhD program of mine. A month after our daughter was born, my father died of a massive heart attack in Kolkata. So he didn't live to see his granddaughter.
that was in 85? 85.
No, in 84. So 83 December, our daughter was born, and in 84, my father passed away. It is the dreaded phone call that every son or daughter living away from family, is really worried to receive one day. And I got that dreaded phone call early in the morning, 14th of January in 1984, when somebody said, "Hello, your father has just passed away in Kolkata." Okay, and obviously I had no money to buy a plane ticket to come home. So a blessing in my life, our daughter, and a tragedy in my life, the death of my father, appeared really close in time, in terms of time.
Yeah. So, and then you finished your engineering in 3 years, and
My PhD in management in 3 years.
management, sorry, yeah,
Right, and then knew that I wanted an academic job for the following reason. I'd not abandoned the arts. I'd not abandoned my passion for the arts at all. But I was in search of a career which was the least disruptive of the arts. Think about this. Only a professor in a research university, okay, is in charge of her or his destiny. Okay. So if I do my teaching and my research, then I'm my own boss. My dean can't fire me. I can't fire him. Okay. And therefore, if I could manage my life properly, then I could actually be a creative person, not a Sunday writer, not a part-time writer, not a hobby writer, but really a serious, committed writer, and still be able to put food on the table, which is the purpose of the profession.
So at that stage, you did have that feeling that you are out of the 4 A's. You didn't become an actor, didn't become, even an author, but become an academic.
So the 4 A's of my life, which I think I've mentioned to you, is early on, I wanted to be an artist, nothing else, a visual artist, that is, painter. Of course, then I was a child actor in Mrinal Sen's films, so I wanted to be an actor. Didn't quite happen. Wanted to be an author, happened much later. But what happened was I became the fourth A. I became an academic. Okay. And that happened when I finished my PhD and I took a position at McGill University in Montreal, Canada's finest university, really, as an assistant professor of business. And that was the journey that eventually led me to Oxford 13 years later.
So, Kunal, I'll take a pause here because after you finished your PhD, you had multiple job offers in the US and in Europe, right? So I think 14 offers. So why did you decide on McGill? So, I mean, obviously that must have been playing on your mind as always that you would have enough time to do your travel.
Right. I mean, look, it was a difficult choice. I mean, first of all, I was very young. Shushmita and I were both very young. And if you have, I only applied for academic positions. I had 14 job offers, 12 in the US, one in France, and one in Canada. And many of these offers had pluses and minuses, and it was very hard to decide where to go. So the dean at McGill played a trick on me, and he said, "Oh, you don't have to make up your mind. Why don't you and your wife just come over to Montreal and spend a week, and we'll pick up the tab." Now remember, as graduate students, you're dirt poor. You can't afford a holiday. Mm-hmm. So this was an offer which was hard to pass up, and so we went to spend a week in Montreal and absolutely fell in love with this city. Okay. What a wonderful city Montreal is, and that made us make up our minds, and we said, yes, we will take the job, and we didn't regret it. And the good part of it is we didn't regret it.
Oh, lovely. See, thematically, you're always listening to yourself. So that's been happening as a trend across every single period of time where there's a fork in your life, but you've been instinctively listening to yourself. So that helps. So you were there till 2000, right? 2000, you moved to Oxford?
1999.
1999. You took a sabbatical and went, or you went straight to Oxford?
Yes. I had no plans of leaving Montreal and going to Oxford. At that point, I had sort of built up a reputation in the area of executive education, so teaching CEOs and MDs of top companies around the world. And I had a call from Oxford, and the dean at the business school said, "Well, would you like to come and teach a short course during the summer?" And I asked the typical question: "What are the dates and how much are you offering?" And both of them worked for me, and I came to do that short teaching stint. At the end of which, he said, "Why don't you move to Oxford?" And I said, "Why would I do that? Why would I do that?" And he said, "What is the one thing in your life which is the most important thing?" Okay. And I said, "Time." Because he didn't know it, but I'd already started writing my first novel, The Opium Clerk.
That's right.
And having two serious pursuits, okay, an academic pursuit where you're researching, you're teaching, you're guiding doctoral students, you're attending committee meetings as a senior faculty member, and being a novelist, the real casualty is time. The real, the item which is in short supply is time. And he said, "What do you mean by time? What is it that you're looking for?" I said, "Look, I don't want to teach undergraduates, not because I dislike teaching undergraduates, but because it's time taxing. I only want to supervise doctoral dissertations and teach senior executives. I don't want any committee assignments. Okay. And I want to move from North America to Britain in North American terms, which means with tenure and with North American salaries." And he said, "Fine." And that's why I came over, and I came on a sabbatical. I wanted to test out to see whether really Britain works for us, Oxford works for us. And luckily, it did. And so we've been there for a while.
Slightly from this part, Kunal, while you were in Canada, you've had some incredible experiences while your travel. I think you opened the first business school in Havana in Cuba, right?
Yeah. So again, whenever I'm asked, has my academic life, professional life helped my writing, I hum and haw a bit. Okay. it's hard for me to come up with a very clear answer one way or the other. Okay. But it really had helped me and has helped me in very significant ways. Because McGill University was a global university. So unlike a good business school in America, which tends to be more inward looking, in Montreal and at McGill, there were many international projects that were happening all over the world and in uncharacteristic places. So for example, China. I became the director of the Canada-China Management Education Program, traveled to China 12 times. It really helped because Shushmita was a student of Chinese language. Okay, taught in Indonesia, taught in Thailand, taught in the Central Asian republics, taught in Latin America on behalf of McGill programs. And a part of that was the adventure, really, of going to Cuba when Americans were prohibited to travel to Cuba, but not people, academics from Canada, went and started the first business school in the Department of Economics, the University of Havana. So all of these travels enriched me. All of these travels actually gave me unique perspectives about human character and about the nature of societies and organizations, which forms, obviously, the fodder for fiction.
I get that.
Literature. Okay. So it expanded my mind. It ripped me up from a comfortable position in a small provincial town and it took me to the world. Okay.
Including being in Tiananmen Square on the 4th of June, 1989.
3rd June night is engraved in my memory. I can never forget 3rd of June. I can forget my birthday. I can never forget 3rd of June. Because 3rd of June night, 4th June morning, 1989 is when the Tiananmen event occurred. And I was in Tiananmen Square with my camera, with 2 young Chinese students who acted as my interpreters. And then, God knows how, made my way out of it and came back to where Shushmita and Ashlai were, which is the university where we were put up.
The Indonesian riots also, I think you were there in...
Yeah.
When
Suharto deposed and Jakarta exploded, I'd gone to Jakarta to give a talk and had to sort of very hurriedly make my way over to the airport. So you shouldn't travel with me, Sayan, because I always get into dangerous traps.
But you explore like a true seeker. All parts. So you've been to China 12 times, right? So that's the seed for why you've had 2 of your novels which has got some link with China. We'll come to that later.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. The Opium Clerk was the first novel in English on the opium trade, which I published in 2001. The trade that engulfed, obviously, India, China, but also Malaya. So my novel is set in Kolkata, in Canton, which is Guangzhou, today's Guangzhou, and in Kuching, which is in Borneo. And my 4th novel, The Yellow Emperor's Cure, which is a novel about Chinese medical systems as opposed to the Western medical systems, and a search for the cure of syphilis is also set in China. So I've got 2 novels which are set in China.
And you've asked some very deep questions. We'll come to that later regarding to the cure and how you saw it 10 years back. It's nearly 10 years you wrote that, right? 2011, I think.
That's right.
Around over that point. Brilliant. So Kunal, now then you were in UK till 2000 and...
Well, I'm still in the UK because we live in Oxford, but I came last year for the India tour of one of my novels called Sarojini's Mother. And then the pandemic struck. And so we can't go back to our home in Oxford. So we are in our Kolkata home right now. In the initial months, UK was more dangerous than India, so we were advised not to go. In the later months, India turned out to be more dangerous than the UK, so we couldn't leave. And now we're just waiting for the right moment when travel restrictions are lifted to travel back to Oxford. So we still live in Oxford. Yeah.
But you've taken retirement in 2019 from Oxford.
Very early retirement in 2020. I mean, that was a funny story in itself. So when I went to my dean at the side business school, And I said, I want to take my retirement 9 years before I was supposed to retire, 9 years before. And he said, he thought I'd gotten into a fight with a colleague or something like that, or somebody's misbehaved with me. And he said, why is that? I mean, can I help? Can I solve a problem for you, Kunal? I said, no. It's got nothing to do with that. You see, my life has changed. I see myself more now in the mold of an author than a full-time academic. I do enjoy some aspects of my academics, but not really that much to continue being a full-time academic. So I don't want to pretend. I don't want to masquerade, And reluctantly, he said, well, okay, if that's what you want, then that's what you do at university. Yes, you see, even if you want to leave the university doesn't want to leave you. So I was trapped once more by Ahmedabad University. It's a wonderful new private university, very global. And they asked me to be the distinguished professor of humanities and teach any course of my choice. I don't have to live in Ahmedabad. This is all done remotely. So I've just finished teaching very bright students a course called Literature for Life. Yeah. So
you teach
I do have
in a year. So you have the whole year to yourself.
Yeah.
And
so I do have my feet half into academia, despite my ardent desire to leave it.
But this is the first 20 years so we've got a feel of the meander you have had in your life as an academic, the fourth A instead of the third A. So we'll transit to the third A after we take a short 7.5-minute break where we'll have a pictorial run through of some of the years you have had in this journey, which we just spoke about, Kunal. So this is a bit of a surprise for you. I might not be able to capture all the moments which are relevant, but I think some moments are captured in this. So we'll take a small break and I will share screen and we'll have a look at this video. And then we'll get back into the books part. I must confess, I did get some of those lovely pictures from your website, and it's some of them are so precious, especially the one with Shushmita, your sister, and the ones where I think there were few pictures of you as a child, and they're the only ones which are there on record. So, and that did show a little bit of you in your earlier years, and try to put it in timescape as to how it was when you were before you met Shushmita and while you met Shushmita and while you were in the US, and you had those beautiful journeys overseas and in China for a while. And in, I think a lot of it is in Florida also, right? I love the picture of you with the sea behind and your 1970s style of hairstyle flowing. So that's in the abundance of your life and living at that stage. So that was extraordinary, really. Thank you for that. I didn't take your permission for all those pictures, but I hope you wouldn't mind too much, really. And of course, to share the lovely homes which you had in Oxford, as well as the home you have in Lake Road in Kolkata. So we were privileged to go and see that, I think just before the pandemic. How lovely that. I still remember the first thing you said while we entered was, look at this lovely maple tree outside. This is what I stare at and do my writing. And that also reminds me of your stay when you were in South City in Kolkata. Every time I came to the flat, and the first thing you did was, look at that skyline. The clouds are so magnificent today. It's so different than what it was yesterday. So you never held on to a particular moment. Each moment was as special as it is for a mind who is always looking at things so differently and beautifully. Thank you for that, Kunalda. So I will now get back to the second part of our discussion. Kunalda, you're one of the very few practitioners of historical fiction. Apart from your love of history, perhaps it has something to do with the influence of your favorite author, Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay. Bankim himself was influenced by Walter Scott and was a writer of historical novels. As were many writers of the 19th and 20th century, whom you avidly read as a child, like Ramesh Chandra Dotto and Sharadendu Bandyopadhyay. But more than anything else, you have often said that what draws you more to this genre is the romantic possibilities of the historical novel, the scope to inhabit other places and other times, and thus enable the reader to romance the strange, the unexpected. So this is such a lovely way of putting across how, so this your primary instinct to break the traditional way of thinking for the average reader with a rich cocktail of the emotions which you pour forth with it. And they are often layered, and and deals with the conscious and the subconscious mind, often with shades of turbulent turmoil. You inject them in with ferocity and abstruse pangs of survival in the real environment, amidst striking imbalances in our often hypocritical society, where the deceptive human mind always yearns for quiet, for perfection, for harmony, and negates reality in every sense of the term. And
You know, Shayan, the impetus for writing for me comes from a story that I've somehow thought about, dreamt up. The most difficult question to answer, and honestly, the most difficult question to answer is, how on earth did you think of this story? It's easier to explain how I wrote a story. Okay, what method, what research, what approach, and so on and so forth. Okay, but the impetus for story making, history is one impetus for story making, not the only one. I've written 4 historical novels. My first 4 novels were all historical novels, but I've also written contemporary novels following that. Okay, and my new novel, which is a contemporary novel, is due out in January of 2022. Uh, History was important and exciting to me for precisely the reasons that you mentioned. You see, it is a gold mine. History is a gold mine, which is ready to be robbed. Why do I say that? Because it is full of incomplete stories. It is full of small little indications of people doing things, events, and then suddenly disappearing from sight. Okay, as was the case with my second novel, The Miniaturist, the protagonist Behzad. Okay, so here is the opportunity, providing the opportunity to a creative writer to actually make up stories. Okay, and being a romantic that I am, the lure of another time, of another place, it always has always been there. Okay, and I think if you combine that with my early travels around the world, there was a trail of sensibility, a trail of sensuousness that guided my first four historical novels. But having said that, I also have written many contemporary works. All my Bengali novels are contemporary novels. And my last novel, which is yet to be published, is contemporary. Yeah.
So you maintain this fine balance with history in many ways, and you flirt with it with a purpose. You like to fertilize your mind, yet you don't want to get too caught up with historical facts.
No, you see, that is, I think, for me, look, there are all kinds of historical novels, okay? There are some authors of historical fiction who are completely embedded in the factual details of a particular time and a place, etc. And their novels are in many ways non-fiction in disguise, okay? Historical tracks in the guise of fiction. I don't come from that place at all, okay? I think of a story, and when a story appears and the story happens to be located in another time and place, then I have to educate myself, because I'm not a historian. I have to educate myself and ask myself the question, what should I do? What should I read? Maybe I should give you an example rather than talk in the abstract. Okay. Mm-hmm. Let me give you the example of a novel which I wrote called The Yellow Emperor's Cure. Okay. So I went to China for an academic visit. Okay. I've been there many, many times. I was in Beijing. And one of my Chinese ex-students who'd done her studies with me, who then became the director of a public health institute, health management institute, attached to the largest university for traditional Chinese medicine in Beijing. Okay, so traditional Chinese medicine, a hospital and a training and a university, and its associated public health management institute. She was the director of that, and she invited me for lunch, and I almost said no. Because these are very boring things, you know. I mean, I've done many of these banquet lunches and dinners, and you sit around and people talk to you through translation. You nod your head. It's very polite and it's very boring. Okay, but a small voice in the back of my head said, "Kunal, go. She's your student, and be nice, be polite." So I went reluctantly. Reluctantly, I went. And we had a very boring lunch. At the end of it, the director and my student and others said, "Would you like to go up and see our museum of traditional Chinese medicine?" I said, "Sure. I love museums." And they took me up to the museum. It's a government hospital and university, dust all over. They opened the locks, put on the lights, let me in, and then they all disappeared. I was left to myself, roaming through this strange exhibit. I say strange because they're strange compared to a non-Chinese person, of the ingredients of Chinese medicine. So a bear's paw, for example, okay, or some kind of roots, okay. And as I was walking around, I was talking to myself. I was saying, why am I so surprised? I'm a 21st century citizen. I certainly know a bit about Chinese medicine. I've read about things. Why am I so surprised seeing these things? Now, if I'm so surprised, just imagine how surprised a European would be if he or she came here in the 19th century. So why would a European be here in the first place looking at Chinese medicine? What if he was a doctor? What if he was a European doctor? But why would a European doctor come here looking for Chinese medicine things? In the 19th century, the Europeans believed that they knew everything about everything. They were the masters of the universe. And everybody else were barbarians. What if See, I'm thinking this as I'm walking around. What if the doctor was trying to find the cure for a disease for which there was no cure in Europe? Ah, well, that made sense. What would that disease be? Ah, it has to be syphilis, right? In the 19th century, before the advent of penicillin, for 400 years, syphilis had ravaged Europe. There was no cure for this darn disease. It was a horrible disease, and its final stage was lunacy. What if I wrote a story about a European doctor who came to China in the 19th century to look for a cure for syphilis? And the story was born in my mind right there. And I forgot the other appointments of the day. I dashed back to the hotel. And a pad of with a paper and pen, I started scribbling down the story as it appeared in my mind. Okay, and it's a 19th century historical novel. Okay, but that's how the story came. And when I thought of the story, I said, "Now wait a second. I know nothing about syphilis. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a history of medicine person, so I have to read up. I know nothing about the late 19th century and the Boxer Rebellion, in which this young European doctor, who became a Portuguese doctor in my novel, got caught up. So I started reading about the Boxer Rebellion. Okay, and I started reading about Chinese medicine and its difference with Western medicine, and all the details, all the exciting anecdotes and details about that. Okay, so the history that I read was to support my imagination. Okay, so imagination comes first for me. The impulse for a story comes first for me. And then if it's a historical story, it may not be, then I go raiding the house of history to educate myself, but educate myself just enough so I can bring my imagination to life. Okay, if I read too much, if my academic self dominates my novelist self, then I will spoil the novel, as it has happened with many Indian English writers of historical fiction. They spoil the story because they're enamored by their research, and they read volumes and volumes and volumes, and it turns out, the novel turns out to be historical track in the disguise of fiction.
How well said. But even in this research and the amount of background work which you do, you've come up with something which is so extraordinary. Where could you like to talk about that? Where you mentioned that the way the Europeans treated the medicine, I mean the disease, and the way Chinese treated the disease, where they wanted the disease to attack the patient and not to the Europeans attack the disease, right? So that is so relevant, this pandemic. It's 10 years later, and it's very strange that you chose a city, a location, a locale, a background, an illness, which has similar measure to the pandemic which is happening now. I mean, it's strange coincidence or whatever I could say.
Yeah, disease never goes out of fashion, unfortunately. You've got one kind of disease, and humanity grapples with it and ultimately manages to find a resolution or a cure. And then there's another disease that comes in. Okay. And so history of medicine is fascinating to me. And again, I'm not a historian. This is not what I set out to do. When I sit down to write, I never say, now let's pick a historical period, let's pick a historical issue and fashion a story around it. For me, it is exactly the opposite direction. Okay, the story comes first, and I don't know how it comes. In many cases, I don't have a clue. In this case, and I actually can think of when I thought of this story of the Yellow Emperor's Cure. Yeah.
So it's so the historical fiction, a writer must balance the story on the fine line of what John Updike used to say, the vigorous fakery in some stage, which you were mentioning, while somehow ringing true.
Yeah. Look, plausibility is important. If I wrote a novel which was set last year in the US, and I said the president of the United States was Joe Biden, you would say, no, you got it wrong. President of the United States last year was Donald Trump. Okay. If my facts are flawed, then I will lose the reader. The reader will counter-argue the narrative. They'll say, no, this doesn't sound right. He's wrong. It's not, can't be. Okay. So in historical fiction, it's the same thing. You have to make sure that the basic facts are right. Okay, and that's not difficult to do. I'm a trained academic, so it's not difficult for me to get the basic facts right.
But you must have that courage to boldly and wittily break the narrative rules, which you do so often. And you call this that magical realism, or it's a realism which is so, so full of a spin-off, which makes it, we are engrossed in it because we think that's the reality and realism in which everything is happening.
Yeah. You fashion a story out of, set another time and it's another place. Yeah.
So, how did you break free from this, from 4 historical novels, and then when you came up with Calcutta in 2015, right? So that was something which was, V.S. Naipaul has mentioned Calcutta as a slowly dying city. Rudyard Kipling has said this is one of the most wicked places on earth. A lot of books have been written on Kolkata, including Amit Chaudhary's written Calcutta. But you have, in your latest and distinctive flavor, given a kind of a different dimension to the city. Could you like to tell us what's the background behind getting
Yeah.
Calcutta on?
See, my agent in London and my then publisher, Maggie McKernan, always said, Kunal, you're a Kolkata boy, so why don't you write a Calcutta novel? Okay. And I said, why do I? Why do I need to do that? Okay. Honestly, I had not written a contemporary novel set in Kolkata, because I hadn't thought of a story that kept me awake at night. Okay. I couldn't just sit down and say, okay, now I'm going to write a Calcutta novel. Let's think of a story. That's not how my mind works. I think of the story first. Okay. So the Kolkata story had eluded me for many years. Even if I wanted to write one, I didn't have one to write. Then one day, a strange thing happened. You see, for a long period of time in Kolkata, I did not own a car. And that was by design, because I wanted to walk. And if it was too far, my destination was too far, I would take an Uber or a taxi. Okay. And it's important, I think, for an author in particular to walk around, to go to bazaars, to sit in tea shops, and to rub shoulders everywhere. Okay. Rather than lock herself or himself into sort of like an enclosed place. Okay. Because the stories are out there. The stories are not all within me. The stories are out there. So one night I was walking around the Sada Street area. If you know Kolkata, you would know exactly. It's adjacent to the Indian Museum, okay, where you've got lots of these small little lodges for backpackers, very cheap, and backpackers usually come and stay there. Okay, Free School Street, Sada Street, that area.
Zakaria. Okay.
Yeah, Zakaria Street is not there. Zakaria Street is in Chitpur. So I saw a bunch of young men sitting on motorcycles outside these lodges, very good looking, smelling of perfume, gold chain, Rolex watches, could be fake Rolex watches, but expensive watches, far better dressed than I was. Okay. And I was sitting in a juice bar and I was talking to the owner, and I said, "Kaun hai in log?" And they said, well, they're tour guides. So when these foreigners come, they take them on tours, they take them to Shantiniketan, Dakshineshwar, the Kali temple, what have you. I said, what else do they do? Well, and he sort of indicated that if the tourists want drugs, they acquire some drugs for them. I said, okay, I see. Aur kya karte hain log? And this guy said one sentence, और दूसरा कुछ सेवा लगे तो. दूसरा कुछ सेवा लगे तो. What could that seva be? And I said, so here is a story. And I started exploring the world of male prostitutes in Kolkata, the gigolos, who hang around Sada Street and in other places. And there were a whole range of clientele. Okay. And many of them are non-Bengalis. And that trail took me to Chitpur, to Zakaria Street. Okay. And a story was born in my mind. That was my Kolkata story. Not a story about the Bengalis of Kolkata. Not a story about intellectuals of Kolkata, which is what is a typical trope of Indian writers writing in English about Kolkata, is they write about the intelligentsia, the middle class. Okay, I grew up in that world, and it doesn't excite me. Okay, I'm excited by the unfamiliar, by the strange, by a world that I do not know, rather than the world that I do know. Okay? And for 2 years, I lived in the world of the male prostitutes, tried to befriend them. It was hard. I got to meet them, got to interview them, became friends with them, went to their homes, met their families, met their clients. Okay? And out of that world, Calcutta was one, which is why the novel is called Calcutta, not Calcutta, not Kolkata. If you ask a non-Bengali, "Aap kahan ja rahe hain?" "I'm Calcutta ja raha hu." "Where are you going?" "I'm going to Calcutta." Okay. Which is why it's the world of the non-Bengalis, the marginalized non-Bengalis. Okay. Who, because they are not as privileged as us, they would desperately like to belong to this city, but they can't find a legitimate occupation through which they can find a respectable home in the city. Okay. So they're marginalized to all these different kinds of professions. Not everyone becomes a Chicago, but they all kinds of marginalized professions. And we, the cultured Bengali intelligentsia, we don't know them. We think they're aliens. We think they're strange. And to them, we are aliens. We're strange. Okay. So that's how Calcutta was.
Oh, well said. And that's a complex story with so many characters and so many incidents, and it's gripping. So you need to finish that book in 2 days. Whoever gets it needs to complete it at one go. You can't break free from within the chapters. But there's an interesting trivia to that. The cover design of Calcutta, I think Pinaki, y'all won a couple of awards for that, right?
Yes. Yes.
I still remember you telling me that quite some time back. So that was interesting. Can we talk about the one which everyone talks about? The Japanese wife.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know you'll not want to talk about that too much, but
No. I can actually talk about it. Everywhere I go, people do ask me about the Japanese. I remember I was reading from The Japanese Wife in Singapore many years back. And there was a young lady in the audience, and he said, "Why the Japanese wife? Why couldn't it be the Cambodian wife?" It turns out that she was Cambodian. Okay?
That's right.
I said, "Well, the Japanese wife is the Japanese wife that appeared to me in this story." And it also happened through coincidence. Okay. Many years ago, when I was in university, when I was not really focused on writing fiction, when the main purpose of my life was to commit the revolution in India. Okay. I was traveling with a friend of mine in a village in Bengal, in South Bengal. Okay. And we were waiting at the jetty, waiting to catch a steamer. And this friend of mine, and I was all of 20, I think, 19 maybe. And this friend of mine pointed to a middle-aged, portly man, bald head, carrying an umbrella, dhoti Punjabi, standing at the jetty, and said, "See that man? He's a school teacher. He has a Japanese wife." But that's very odd, isn't it? I mean, in an Indian metropolis, you can find people who have foreign spouses. Okay, but in rural Bengal, to have somebody who's married to a Japanese. Now, I consider myself extremely fortunate because I did not ask any follow-up questions to my friend. I didn't say, "How come? I mean, how did they meet? I mean, does he speak Japanese? Has he been to Japan? I mean, does she come? Do they have kids? What language do they speak in?" None of this. My mind was elsewhere. But the human mind is a strange thing, Shayan. It recorded this small piece of information inside my mind. A school teacher in South Bengal in a village has a Japanese wife. And more than 2 decades later, on a night of snowstorm in Montreal, when the snowstorm was raging outside my window, I sat at my desk and wrote the story, The Japanese Wife.
So this started in 86. You wrote this in 86?
No, I wrote this. When did I write this? No. We went to Montreal in 1986. It was written in the early 90s, sometime in the early 90s. And I didn't publish it. I didn't publish it because I published novels, and there is this strange publishing myth in the West, certainly in the United Kingdom, that for new writers, for debutants and new writers, you write novels and publish novels, you become well known, then you write short stories. Okay, So although I had a bunch of short stories that I'd written, including The Japanese Wife, I never published them. But it's only when Aparna Sen wanted to make a film out of this story that my agent said, Kunal, it's about time that you put the stories together and have the book come out. Because then people will say, based on the story by Kunal Basu, but where is the story?
More short stories to complete that whole compendium of 12. I think there were 12 short stories in The Japanese Wife, right?
Yes.
So tell us about the incident. How did Aparna Sen meet you? And all that happened in UK, right? While you were in UK at a party?
Yeah. I knew Aparna Sen by reputation, but never met her. Mm-hmm. So we were invited to a party by a very famous Bengali historian who's now passed away, called Tapun Raichaudhuri, who was a very dear friend of Shushmita. He and Hashidi were dear friends of ours. They were much senior to us, but we had a very wonderful time. They were our neighbors. And he said, look, I'm throwing a small party and Aparna Sen is going to come. And she's, of course, a celebrity and a whole lot of people will come and visit them. Now, I'm personally allergic to celebrities, I have to tell you. Okay. And I had a very important college event that night. So I said, sorry, Tapunda, I can't come because I'm too busy. We've got things in the college. He said, no, please come. And Shushmita, who's far more social than I am, said, look, they're elderly people. They're inviting us. We ought to go. We ought to go, even if it's after dinner, after you come back from college, maybe just go for coffee and cakes and things like that. So I went. We went. And I was actually quite grumpy. I didn't want to go. Okay. And as usual, a lot of people had gathered to meet Aparna Sen, and she walked through the crowd. She came up to me and said, I was really wanting to meet you because your novel, The Miniaturist, is my favorite novel. Now, all of us are bowled over by flattery, you know. And if somebody says good things to us, we melt. And I melted, you know. And my mood improved. I started smiling. And I had a glass of wine in my hand. And she said, I'd love to make a love story, except that all good love stories have been written already. You know, Romeo and Juliet and this and that. I said, no, hang on. I wasn't pitching a story to her, but I was in a good mood. So I said, I have a love story, which is very different. She said, tell me. And in about 7 minutes, I told her the story of The Japanese Wife. Okay. And she said, well, can we come over to your place? We were neighbors to Tapun Raichaudhuri tomorrow. I said, yeah, sure you can. And she came and she said, have you sold this story to anybody? I said, no. Don't sell it to anybody. I want to make a film. Now, look, filmmakers say lots of things, so I didn't really believe it. In those days, my mom was still alive and she wasn't doing too well in terms of health. And I would always pass by Kolkata on my way to Southeast Asia or China. And I remember stopping in Kolkata to see my mother when Aparna called and said, look, you need to sell me the rights of this story now because my producer wants to make the film. So then I knew it was happening. So that's how it came about.
Wow, that's quite a story. And you had Chingusa Takaku. Chingusa was a Japanese actress.
Chingusa Takaku. I never met her. I mean, when the film was being shot in Bengal and in Japan, I was doing a literary residency in Australia. So I was not physically in the country. I was in Australia, and I only went to shooting once near Kalighat, and Aparna cast me in this cameo role. So there's a split 1 or 2 minutes where I do appear in the film, and I had no clue that I would be cast. But I think 2 days. I think I went to attend shooting on 2 occasions.
And did she change the script, or it was exactly the way you had written it?
No, I mean, she. To be fair, she did a wonderful job in writing the screenplay. I did not wish to be a part of the screenplay writing because I had exhausted all my passion in writing this short story, and I wanted to make sure that the director and I shared the same sensibility with respect to this story. And I had enough trust on her as a filmmaker to say, no, you go ahead and you do write the screenplay. But she showed it to me in parts as she was writing it. That was a very strange thing because when she was writing the screenplay, actually, I was on a cruise in Alaska. She was in Kolkata. I was on a cruise in Alaska. And she would send me the screenplay in bits and pieces, and I was be sitting on the cruise ship reading the screenplay of the Japanese wife. Yeah.
Amazing. Kunal, every incident of yours has got something which is so special and different, and the meander continues. Now, coming to your Bengali novels, right? I mean, would you like to talk about some of the Bengali novels? I mean, I don't know whether everybody's aware that Kunal is the only bilingual English Bengali novelist after Bankim Chandra who has I think Bankim Chandra has written just one, right? Rajmohan's wife in 1864. So Kunal is the only person who writes in both languages, in Bengali and in English. And he's written 3 Bengali novels, Ravi Shankar.
Four Bengali novels.
Of course, with Angel going to come out soon.
Angel has come out.
Angel has come out already, sorry. Yeah. So it's Ravi Shankar in 2016, Bayret Dodja in 2017, Tejashwini and Shobhan in 2018, and Angel in 2020, just prior to the pandemic. Would you like to talk about any? I think let's talk about Tejashwini. I think that's the one where it's really intriguing, the story which you've got of a different locale altogether. Could you give us a background story as to also how that the book came about?
Yeah, I mean, again, came about through happenstance. I mean, most of the time as an author, I'm open to accidents happening in my life, or strange things happening in my life. Because when they do, then you might just find the kernel of a story. So a producer from Bombay called me, as producers oftentimes call me from Bombay, saying, well, we want a story. We want you to give us a story. So this producer called to say that we want you to write a story about trafficking. This horrible practice of trafficking. Okay. And I never write to anybody's, specific orders. So I said, no, look, I don't do that. If I think of a story of writing only then about trafficking, then I would write a story about trafficking. Okay. And I hung up. Okay. But later it struck me that maybe I could take this opportunity and actually explore a world which I've never explored. Okay. And fortunately, I was between books then. Okay. So I called him up and I said, look, can you arrange a meeting with me with young women who had been trafficked and who've come back, have been rescued? They said, sure. And through an NGO, they arranged for me to go to Sandesh Khali, which is between North and South Chobbish Pargana, not far from Kolkata. Mm-hmm. And I left on a research trip, really, to meet and interview some of these young women who have been really, really treated very badly. Okay. And I went with my recorder, with my pad and paper and pen and all of that to do my job, to research. And when I arrived in Sandesh Khali, they took me to an old abandoned schoolhouse, school building. The roof was falling off. It was really in a dilapidated state. And as I went in, there were 14 young girls, and I call them young girls because the youngest I think might have been just 15 or 16 to about 22, 23, 14 of them sitting, waiting for me. And I tell you, Sayan, I fell silent. I couldn't ask a single question. The barbarism, the sheer barbarism that has subjected them to such ordeals, and there are many who haven't been rescued. These were the lucky ones who were rescued, okay? Completely stupefied me. Look, we know about trafficking. I mean, you read these reports in newspapers, you're familiar with it. And as I was familiar too, but to face these victims and to see, and they were, as younger than my daughter, okay? And I saw them, I just couldn't ask a single question. As I was coming away, there was this young girl, and I said, Ma, tumi kothay gichile? Where did you go? And she said, Arab Deshi. She didn't know the name of the country in the Middle East. She said, Arab Deshi. Okay. And I was traumatized by it. I was completely traumatized by this. And when I came back, these 14 pairs of eyes blended into a pair of eyes, and I called her Shabnam. And I wrote this story called Tejashwini or Shabnam, where 2 Bengali women from very different backgrounds. Tejashwini, a CNN journalist, born in Bengal, but she was an orphan, but raised by foster parents in New York, is a daring journalist who's come to cover the war after the death of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Who does she meet? She meets Shabnam, a young woman who was trafficked from South Bengal, from the Sundarbans. Okay? And she's landed up through the twist of destiny in the Middle East, in Iraq. The two Bengali women from completely two different backgrounds, they've met. And there is an intrigue and a mystery that also connects them and their past, which I'm not going to reveal here for those of you who may still be interested in reading that novel. Okay. That novel was translated into English, came out, called The End Game. There are talks of it being made into a film now, but it's premature for me to talk about it. So that was the story of Tejoshini or Shabnam.
But Kunal, why is it that you had Arunabha Sinha to write this to translate it in English when you're an able-bodied resource yourself?
Because I don't like translating.
Is it too boring?
Many people have asked me this question: why don't you translate your mother's Bengali writing into English? Okay. That's a major problem with Bengali fiction, or Bengali writing in general. We don't have a strong translation culture in this part of the world. And I have to confess that translation I find very unattractive, especially translating my stuff. I mean, a novel which I've already written in English, to go back and then translate it into from Bengali to English or what have you, I have no appetite for it.
Very few people know that you have written a non-fiction too, apart from this. That's Intimacies of 2011. Intimacies. Yeah. So that's a incredible collection of photographs, right? By
I hate to call it non-fiction for the following reason.
Okay.
I was asked by a publisher if I would write a foreword to an album of photographs. And I said, no, I don't write forewords. I don't write this sort of stuff at all. I write full-length manuscripts of what I consider to be substantial things, okay? Novels, short stories, what have you. And, but I was curious because I'm a photographer, or at least I had pretensions to being a photographer at one time. So I said, let me look at the photographs. So send me the photographs, and I said, my God, there's a story in here. And these are not pretty photographs. They're photographs of friendship, an unlikely friendship between a young photographer and his muse, an elderly lady who's a professor of philosophy. They're not related by blood. They live in the same house, but she inspires his photography, and she then gets lung cancer, and she dies, and he becomes the sole caregiver of this person. And I was seeing these photographs of daily life in an old traditional Bengali household, not pretty at all. And this woman suffering and dying, and the photographs being taken almost till the point of her death, because she kept insisting, take my photograph, take my photograph. Okay. I said, I have to meet this photographer. And there's a story in there. And when I met him, and I said, you have to tell me everything, even if it makes you cry. Even if it makes you cry. And so I wrote, I called them Intimacies, and I wrote 7 almost standalone pieces, which could also be short stories, which are around this, which is all fashioned around this incredible friendship and intimacy between this photographer and his muse, this professor of philosophy.
So it's like the observed and the observer both going through this. The narrative is bringing to life the remarkable world of the photographer and the photographed, right? So this was you have a publication of that on now. I mean, this is available.
Yeah, very much.
It is, right? Brilliant. Kunal, we can't resist asking you about your next novel, which you're bringing out very soon. Would you like to share some details about that?
Not too much, because Penguin is going to make the press announcement very soon, in this month itself, in July. So I don't want to steal their thunder, except to say that it is a novel which is a contemporary novel set in India, And in many ways, it's the novel of our times, because it is about a chasm that we have in our society today between two opposing views of what India is and what it means to be an Indian. Okay? There are certain ideologies and political formations which are saying, to be Indian, you must be this way and this way alone. Okay? And there are other political formations that are saying, to be an Indian, you can be whoever you want to be. Okay? So this is this chasm between two faces of India that informs a narrative which is a close portrait of a family which experiences this chasm firsthand. Okay. So that's what this novel is about. It's not a very long novel, but hopefully a consequential novel for our times.
It's very relevant for our times. That's brilliant. Okay, Kunal, how do I thank you for taking us through this lovely little meander? Of course, we could have discussed your other books too, but we're going to take some of the questions which are coming through there. I've got a whole lot of questions which people have inboxed me, and some of them have sent across. So I really don't know how to begin with this. There are 17 questions. Now, how do I go about this? Okay, before I can start with the ones which have come on box, I have one from Tony. Tony, those of you who wouldn't be knowing, it's Aniruddha Roy Chaudhary. He's a bit busy with his next upcoming film, which is, he's working on that. So he's just got back from Purulia, where he was hunting for a locale. So he's got two questions for Kunalda. Kunalda, should I ask Tony's questions? He's excused himself for not being here today, but he sent this question. The first is, how do you create your characters in your novels? Do you often portray from real lives, or are they all or from your imagination?
Okay. I've never written a character up until now, which is an exact replica of a person I know. Okay. So I've not written a character and say, that person is like my mother-in-law. Okay. Or that person is like Sayan. Okay. I've never done that. Okay. But they're figments of people who, again, not consciously, but have stayed inside my mind and may have come together to create a certain kind of character. Okay. Let me give you one example. Okay. There's a character in my first novel called Mohim. Mm-hmm. Mohim is the uncle of the protagonist, Hiran. Okay. Mohim is an Anglophile. He's a 19th century Bengali, young Bengal. Okay. So a person who is a rebel, a person who is a cosmopolitan, a person who is very foppish, okay, who dresses elegantly, goes to the theater, drinks, okay, which in old Calcutta traditional household, he's an Anglophile. He's not one of the flock, okay, and at the same time, he's incredibly well read, and he knows the literatures of this world, etc. So when some readers read this, they ask me, is Mohim Kunal? And the honest answer is, I don't know. But they may be figments of Kunal in Mohim. Okay. Did I do it consciously? No. Okay. So characters come, is obviously born out of imagination, but what is imagination but something that floats on the wings of your perceived reality?
Oh, well said.
Things that come together and mysteriously create a character. But what I do sometimes consciously take from people I know are mannerisms. Because you see, mannerisms define characters in many ways. I wouldn't use the word define, but they give flavor to a character. There's some people who talk in a particular way, or dress in a particular way, or they have specific gestures. Okay. And when I find things that stand out, these mannerisms that stand out in particular people, I keep a mental note of them. And sometimes they come back into my characters.
I get that. Oh, well. There's this very intense questions which Tony has also asked. That's Aniruddha Roy Chaudhary. Shall I ask this intense question, Kunal?
Sure.
Many young, attractive, intelligent women come to Tony, that's me, for being introduced to you, that's Kunalda. Tony does not succumb to these requests as you are already overburdened with similar fan following, and he's trying to be helpful. Now, his question is, how do you handle such fan following?
Look, I don't think anybody. I have a fan, a single fan in this world, because um, how uh, how do you know that somebody?
Kunal, you're feeling awkward, but you have to come up with the
No,
confession.
no, no, no. Look, I mean, how do you know somebody likes you or admires your work or what have you? If you meet them, okay. So when you see a photograph of Salman Khan or Shah Rukh Khan, you see them getting out of a car and there are hundreds of people around them and they're screaming out his name and things like that. When you see rock stars on a stage, and all of that, Shayan, what I was saying is the reason I don't have any sense of who likes my work, etc., because I live in self-imposed quarantine. I mean, this quarantine is nothing new to me. I mean, I hardly step out of my desk, and Shushmita has to really force me out and say, "Go for a walk, go for your exercises," okay? Because and as far as I'm concerned, I'm talking to this wall and this screen in front of me, so I don't really have a sense for who likes my work. I mean, when I go to book readings and things like that, maybe I encounter some individuals who come up and ask questions, but I really honestly don't have a sense. I wish I'd been the second A, an actor, in which case the word fan would have meant something to me.
And Jaja, Dr. Ram, has also put forward a question. I'm going to read his question.
Sure.
Yeah. So, Jaja, if you manage to join in, he said he'll finish a meeting and try to come in, but I don't think he can make it. So he's asked, so you think young people read less now, or is it a jaundiced view of the older generation? Also, with information so widely available, do you worry books as we know it will lose its significance?
So, two questions really. Look, we don't know the answer. I don't have the crystal ball. So, a lot of people have, apprehensions about whether books will go out of fashion or something like that. Well, first of all, I do think young people read. Okay, they may read differently. They may read ebooks. They may read across different genres. They may not all be equally drawn to literary fiction. But if you go into a bookshop, and I do go to bookshops, you see people who are browsing. Among the people who are browsing, you see a lot of young people. Okay, maybe they're reading self-help books. Maybe they're reading young adults fiction. I'm not particularly tuned into young adults fiction, but apparently that's a booming category. Publishers tell me that. So I would like to think that in every generation, readers are a minority. Have always been a minority. If you think about the people the authors that we greatly admire, in Bengal, if you leave Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay, Somoresh Bose, and Shankar aside, three novelists, Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay, Somoresh Bose, and Shankar aside, who sell by the thousands in great volume. Okay, other authors who are very well-known authors and authors that we cherish and have cherished have not sold a whole heck of a lot of copies.
Mm.
That don't make them lesser authors. Okay, and so reading has always been the domain of the few, and it is the domain of the few that is very attractive to the writer. To answer Jaja's second question, will books will be something of the past? 5-6 years ago, publishers in the UK panicked. And I could see it among editors and other people who thought, with ebooks and stuff like that, nobody's going to buy books, nobody's going to read books. And now with television and visual entertainment, it's all going to go out the window. It's really going to be a dying kind of craft. Okay, it hasn't happened. Hasn't happened. Okay. So I don't have the crystal ball to say whether that will happen. What I do see is that with the OTT, and what I'm saying now is it can be interpreted in different ways. The OTT series is gradually coming to occupy the space of the novel. What does a novel do? Take up 200 to 300 pages, describes location, describes context, character, layers of sensations and feelings, and builds up to climaxes. Okay, a 2-hour movie does not have the time to do that, but a 10-part series provides that opportunity for character development, for contextual shifts, and all kinds of things. Okay, the OTT series, don't get me wrong, the viewing of an OTT series is in no ways aesthetically comparable to reading a novel. Not one is not superior to the other, but they're different. Okay, but I do see a trend whereby the pleasure of novel reading can in some ways be compensated by watching a series.
Well,
and there may be a trend in that direction,
yeah.
which could happen.
That goes to the question which I was to ask you, Kunalda. Is it right to say that you're an eternal optimist?
I'm not actually an optimist. Shushmita, my wife, is a far greater optimist than I am. I mean, when I'm writing something, I'm full of excitement. I'm full of passion. I'm hopeful about the work. I'm hopeful about everything. Mm-hmm. But when I'm not writing, when I've finished my book, or whatever I'm writing, I'm a pessimist. I think nothing is going to work. Nobody's going to read me. I'm going to die in oblivion. All these dark and
instinctive materialistic worries, but that's not going to take it away. Okay, Shalini is asking a question, Kunalda. Your stories are enchanting, Kunal uncle. She's asking this from Dubai. Being a Bengali, do you find it easier to write in Bangla versus English? How do both languages lend themselves to your storytelling?
Yeah, I've given very long interviews on this, so let me not bore you with a long answer. Give you a short answer. I was very fortunate to have grown up in a milieu and at a time when certain kinds of educated Bengalis were bilingual in the true sense of the word. In other words, both literary streams, the literary stream of Bangla and the literary stream of English, flowed equally fluently within them. Behind is my parents' bookshelf, if you can see it. The left is English fiction, the right is Bengali fiction. In other rooms, we've got history and social science and politics and this is all fiction surrounding me, all literature surrounding me. So I grew up with both Bangla and English, okay? And I would like to believe, it may be self-delusion, but I would like to believe that I can swim from one stream to the other stream fluently, with equal fluency. So when I pick up the pen to write in Bangla, I'm fully immersed in Bangla. When I write in English, I'm fully immersed in English.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you for that. Rituparna is here. That's nice. Can we unmute her? She can ask the question herself. Would you like to ask this question, Rituparna? Or I can do it for you. She's written, looking back at 2 decades of writing, which book has given you the maximum satisfaction in terms of what you wanted to achieve with it?
I had a problem unmuting. I had a problem unmuting myself. I'm so sorry. But thank you for asking on my behalf, Sayan.
Sure, no, but you can.
But I still would like to know the answer. Whoever asked the question.
Hard question to answer because I have just one child, as you know, Ritupar, like you. Okay, so I don't have to decide which is my favorite child because there's just one. Okay, but I've got multiple books, and each of them they carry the fond gaze of the creator. Okay, and therefore, if I said the miniaturist, Calcutta would look at me from the shelves and says, "What? Not me?" If I say Calcutta, the Yellow Emperor's Cure is going to look at me with a quizzical look and say, "What do you mean? You spent 15 months in my company. You don't like me?" Okay. So I think I'm not trying to be facetious, but what I'm saying is that different books appeal to me. Of my books, different books appeal to me when I'm in different moods. Okay. So when I'm despondent, the miniaturist appeals to me. Okay. When I'm in an expansive mood, then Calcutta appeals to me. Sarojini's Mother appeals to me. Okay. When I want to have a laugh, I may actually read a small little bit of Sarojini's Mother to me. Okay. When I'm feeling very troubled about this world, I can go back and take a look at Ravi Shankar. I was actually looking at Ravi Shankar the other day for no good reason. Okay. And if I'm particular, and especially if I'm in a very Kolkata nostalgia kind of mood, I really gravitate a bit towards Ravi Shankar, because that was my my college years, my growing up years. Okay, so the short answer to your question, Rituparna, is this: that there is no one book that completely overshadows the others, but there are certain books that I find appealing given the mental state that I am in at a particular time.
Thank you.
I just wanted to thank you for that answer. I just wanted to say something. This is not a question. I'm taking the opportunity to say this. I wanted to, as one of your longest fans, may I remind you of that?
One of them. Okay. Yes.
Yes. So I was very, very displeased when you say you don't have any fan. But as one of your longest
That's
fans,
Kunal, his litote.
Yeah, I wanted to congratulate you on 2 decades of writing and publishing, more than 2 decades of writing, but definitely 2 decades of publishing, because the Opium Clerk came out in 2001, and here we are.
Exactly.
And I have known you for about 17 years now, and in these 17 years, much of my life has been dotted with your books. 72 years, a book comes along, which I buy with great excitement. I read, I get back to you, or I attend a book event. So my life, I mean,
and you have done a number of wonderful interviews also, which I have read, Rituparna.
Yes.
So that was lovely.
Yes,
also.
I have actually also, for a partition scholar, I have devoted a lot of academic attention to Kunal Basu and his works, actually. Your work has been an integral part of my life, and I just wanted to thank you for that at a very personal level.
No, thank you, Rituparna. This is very useful, because quite honestly, sometimes one gets at least I get the feeling that what is this all worth? Is it just I'm filling up my own time? Because if I didn't write, I would go mad, because there's no greater passion that I have in my life. But even if a reader, which is why it's very important for readers also to tell their authors, and you've said it, and I'm grateful for that. That it lends a small degree of confirmation. Well, obviously I'm pleasing myself by writing, but maybe somebody else is deriving even a small little pleasure from what I've done.
Absolutely. Well said.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gautam Dasgupta is asking, your life is full of events. Do you have any plans to write a memoir, autobiography?
It's strange that you should ask, because my agent just the other day was saying, Kunal, is it time to write an autobiography or a memoir? Not yet. But the reason I say not yet is because I've got a long line of story ideas that are queuing up. By the way, I've just finished a book of short stories also during this pandemic year, this 2021, which will follow my new novel, which will come out in January. Okay, so I've been continuously writing the last few last few years, and there's still more stories that are sort of rising up my throat, as it were, which I have to write down. If I were to write a memoir, I would need to think hard and decide how would I write it. Because Somerset Maugham wrote his memoir when he was 60, and he said that some people have told me that it's too early to write a memoir. But I said, and Maugham said, I felt the earlier one writes a memoir, the more authentic it is. Okay, and if you think about it, there may be some truth to it. If one waits too long to write a memoir, then it's not a question of memory fading, but a person somehow becoming more tolerant of one's past and trying to see things in harmony. My life has not been harmonious. It's not been, far from it. As I was mentioning early on, there have been more errors in the trial and error. There have been more meanderings. There have been more blocked ends. There have been more disappointments as an author than success as an author. I have not tasted from the chalice of success. But so if I were to write it now reasonably early, maybe all the edges of my life would still be resonant inside me. So there is some logic to write now. If I were to wait, then maybe I will make everything seem very pleasant and mellifluous and blending into each other and everything being a happy, nice little life.
Kunal, I can't resist.
Undecided.
Absolutely. Now, there's something which you have mentioned earlier on deep autobiography. I'll just read this out. These are your words. And I'm sure there is deep autobiography. I would like to make a distinction between surface autobiography and deep autobiography. I'm a person moved by social justice. I'm a person moved by romance, by inspiration, by compassion. And those will somehow make their presence felt in my books. But I don't have a plan. I don't have a grand strategy. So this is so incredibly said. So your life has been a meander where you have constantly listened to yourself. I mean, I know you keep saying that it has happened spontaneously and in a man of the moment, and you keep doing it when the impulse gets strong. But deep within, when a person is listening to himself at every stage, I mean, it's so brilliant that you have that courage and conviction that you can do it. Of course, it does not necessarily mean that you're, and as a person with an iterative mind, you've had an iterative mind all your years. Even within the iterative ways, you have done things which have been so extraordinarily different from, and that's the purpose of this evening. We're getting to know bits of you outside the domain as an author. So that was another incredible part. We've got another question which is coming. I think just ask it. Bhaskar is asking this from, I think he is in somewhere in Middle East. Sorry, he's asking this question from the place where you taught for so many years. That's from Florida. What do you think of your revolution days in Kolkata in retrospect? And how was the Mughal atmosphere different from Jadavpur University then? God, that's a difficult question.
I didn't get the last bit. How was that?
How was the Mughal atmosphere different from Jadavpur University then?
I mean, there was before McGill, there was my sojourn in the US, and prior to that was Jadavpur. So, Jadavpur and McGill were separated by a number of years. But to answer the first question, what do I make of my revolutionary days? I think I was incredibly fortunate having had that experience. And the reason I say that is that, look, I come from a relatively privileged middle-class Bengali household, which was a part of the intelligentsia. Okay, it would have been dead easy for me to become a part of the beautiful set. People who go to cafes and restaurants, and nothing wrong with that, but really not being exposed to the hard edges of life. Okay, and sort of really see the world through academic experiences in good universities of this world, having very intelligent and smart friends and in witty conversation with them. I could have become easily a part of the beautiful set. Okay, what politics did to me was that it wrenched me out of that and dropped me into worlds that I had no clue of. I remember the election that Mrs. Gandhi lost, Indira Gandhi lost during the emergency. I was sent by my organization to work among the port workers of Garden Reach. Now, I was completely out of my depth. First of all, I didn't speak Hindi fluently. And I'd never lived in a slum. So I lived in a slum, shared space with a worker, and did what I had to do politically up until the day of the election, which Indira Gandhi lost. Okay. And so it gave me experiences about humanity. It exposed me to a wide range of people from different vocations, different backgrounds, different circumstances. Okay, and I think all of that helped me to be the kind of author that I am. And so, what do I make of those years? I'm no longer ascribed to that ideology. Things have happened to me in my life, and in my own self-discovery, I've walked away from Marxism. I've walked away from communism as a guiding philosophy. Okay, but the experiences themselves have left an indelible mark on me.
Oh, well said. But Kunal, in this whole meander, we forgot that little bit where you even taught in I am Cal for a brief period,
Yeah.
right? So that must have been also quite a sudden experience being a young person in
It
an
was
environment.
that was not as accidental as many other things were, because I never quite saw myself as living outside of India. I mean, people always ask me this question: why did you spend, or why have you spent so many years away from India? I'm not an economic refugee. I'm not a political refugee. Then why have I spent so many years away? And I actually don't have a good explanation. I sometimes believe that it has been the lust of travel and the lust of experiences that has kept me traveling around the world. And because I've been gone for such a long time, my suitcases are a bit heavy now. Okay. So I've carried lots of things with me. Um, in that sense, my living abroad has, in some sense, given me perspectives into India itself and my circumstances of life. So I don't know whether it answers your question, but sort of.
Brilliant. Okay. I've got an interesting question for my twin. He's asking this from California. Kunalda, one of my daughters who's a writer, and she's doing script writing in Hollywood, and the other daughter is going to study in Yale. She's doing her management studies. So, and he's asking, who do we, who do we? I didn't get that question completely. He's saying, who do we support more? Something like that. So that's an interesting question, but I did.
You support everybody. I mean, you support all your kids. What option do you have? You're a parent. You support them both. I mean, knowing full well that a writer's life is far more indeterminate than that of a professional. Look, I'll tell you this: publishing an academic article in the highest level of journals in my field is not easy. The rejection rate for publishing an article in a top management journal is sort of in the early 90s. So every 100 papers that are submitted, 90 are rejected, okay, or 91 are rejected. Okay. If you think about publishing literary fiction out of the United Kingdom, out of London, with a big publisher, with a major publisher, the rejection rate is about 99%.
Yeah.
Okay. So it is a life in the arts is far more indeterminate, far more risk prone than a life in any other professional pursuit. And I can say this from my own experience. It's not easy. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying becoming accomplished in a profession is easy. I'm not saying that. Okay. But the life in the arts is doubly problematic.
There's a question from Nivedita Ganguly from the US. Thank you for this great, thoughtful, and thought provoking conversation. My question to you, Dr. Basu, out of so many, which one is your greatest passion? It seemed to me that your journey of life is a significant and serious blend of science and arts. Both need passion to be successful.
Actually, science has never really been a passion. I've fallen into it willy-nilly. I'll tell you this, Nivedita. I go to sleep thinking about my writing, what I'm writing. I wake up thinking about my writing. I want to get through the morning few minutes as soon as I can so I can come to my desk. And I find it really hard to let go of my desk and in the evening. I have no hobbies. Um, I don't know whether it's a good thing to say or not, but I don't have minor pursuits. Um, I only have one consuming obsession in life, which is my writing.
Lovely. Oh, well said. Orinder, my son-in-law, is asking from Dubai. Kunal uncle, through your meanderings over the years, what has been your life's anchors?
Um, Very good question. Shushmit has kept me anchored. There's no question. And not kept me anchored in a sense of, husband, wife, family relationship, responsibilities, duties, etc. Okay. But I have a tendency to fly off and to dream, you know. And Shushmita is not the realist. She is a dreamer herself and almost as crazy as I am. Okay. Um, but between the two crazies, we have managed to land on our feet on most occasions. Okay, so I think that intimacy has kept me on my feet. So that has been a substantial anchor. The other anchor has been all my friends. And you know who are my friends? My friends are Rabindranath Tagore, Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, Emile Zola, Charles Dickens, you know, whole host of authors and poets and artists. When I go to Europe, I always tell people, I'm going to Europe to see my friends. And say, where do your friends live? I mean, what do they do? I said, they're all dead, unfortunately. Amedeo Modigliani, Vincent Van Gogh, Juan Miro, Paulo Picasso, they're my friends. So I'm anchored in my mind in the arts. So in my sad times, I think about my friends. In my happy days, I think about my friends.
What a lovely way to end this evening. I know we are well past our 2-hour time, but Kunal, I really don't know how to thank you for being candid in this conversation. You've let us know so much about your earlier years. You're so shy, you hardly talk about your previous years. I know you're getting emotional also in different ways. I've got about 50 chat notes which have come on. I'll share with you later. Thank you again, everyone, for being part of this candid conversation. Kunalda, I really, really appreciate the time you've taken for us, and I will have this put in YouTube very soon for others who have missed this. But thank you, Kunalda.
Thank you, Shan. Thank you, Shan. Thank you, everybody. Okay.
I think I'll say bye-bye to everyone. Au revoir. And sorry we have held you back on a Sunday evening, but this has been so intriguing and exciting and revealing and much more. Thank you once again. Good night, everyone.
Bye now.